The bottom line is, if I had to judge how safe I was, and this is the bottom line of this, how safe I was traveling from the coronavirus versus how safe I would have been just staying home and socially distancing the normal but imperfect amount that we all do, I feel like I was safer on the road. I don't have a feeling of whether we can tell that closing businesses helps or hurts. I say the opposite, or something very different about masks, and people have pointed out that that looks like an inconsistency. Friction pretty much always works. Now, I'll leave a little wiggle room because I'm sure there's some case where it doesn't. But if you've lived long enough, you see that wherever friction is applied, or wherever it's removed, it has exactly the predictable impact. Well, I guess we have to talk about GameStop, and I guess I have a different opinion about this whole GameStop stuff. Here's what I'm not seeing that other people are seeing. That it's some kind of it's marking some kind of a shift, or it's telling us something about the larger society, or the little people versus the rich. I don't see any of that. So here are the things you need to know, the highlights. It was a high-end resort. It was the Four Seasons in Bora Bora. Could not have been better. It's impossible. There isn't any possible way this trip could have been better once you get there. Getting there is hard, but once you get there, it's amazing. Best scenery, feeling, service you've ever seen. The other thing that's amazing is that the resort, I don't know if they're going to last, because their business was no more than, I don't think there were more than 30 people at the entire resort, which is built to handle hundreds. I don't know how many hundreds, but I think 300 or so. And there were maybe 30 of us there. So entire swimming pools, beaches with 0 people except us. So as a honeymoon, it couldn't have been better. I'll never experience anything like this in my life again, because it was a top level experience with no other people, in a practical sense. So I worry a great deal about the future of their business, but man, it could not have been better. If you get a chance to go before the crowds pick up, here's the risk profile. We got tested once before we flew. So we had to have a result. Now, I suppose we had a little bit of exposure, theoretically, before we flew. But once on the plane, at least I've seen studies that say that the planes are so good with their filtration these days that your odds of getting it on a plane are actually really, really low. People wore masks, but of course they fall asleep and their masks fall off them. So I would say masking is pretty good on the plane, if you think that makes any difference. I'll talk about that in a minute. So I wasn't worried about the plane. And once you get there, there are no people. And the staff is all masked, and they do good social distancing, etc. So they won't even clean your room if they think you're going to be around it for a while. So everything was done really, really well. I think the Four Seasons did everything that they could possibly do. And then you get another test while you're there. So you have to do one before you fly there, once a few days after you've been there, and then once right before you come back. And we did that the same day. Now you've got to coordinate all this in a foreign country, right? So you've got to find a place in Tahiti that will give you a test, that you'll get a result the same day so you can fly later that day. Do you know how worried I was that that wasn't going to work? And you've got 4 hours to get your test and it doesn't come. And you think to yourself, I'm in a foreign country and I can't fly home without this test, and they said it'd be here by now, and it's not. You're checking your email, you're thinking they wrote down a code wrong or something, you'll never get home. Now, of course, these are silly traveler worries, because it's not likely that a place that's a tourist destination has not figured out how to get the tourists home. That's the part I always forget, is that I'm not the first person who ever had to figure this out. Obviously, they have a system. So the hotel works with you, and the hotel will tell you where to get the test, and they'll make sure that you can get a cab there and back, and it's all very civilized and easy. But boy, I'll tell you, the distance they push that swab down your nose in Tahiti, That set a record. I mean, the American tests were bad enough, but the Tahiti tests, they really went for some spelunking for depth there. I think they tickled my brain a little bit. But the bottom line is, if I had to judge how safe I was, and this is the bottom line of this, how safe I was traveling from the coronavirus versus how safe I would have been just staying home and socially distancing the normal but imperfect amount that we all do, I feel like I was safer on the road. I don't know if you could measure that in any way, but if I looked at all the testing that I did and all the other people did, I ended up on an island in the middle of the Pacific without anybody who had either not been there 2 weeks without an infection already, or they got tested within the day that they arrived. So it was actually probably safer than just normal life, and probably a lot safer. It probably wasn't even close. Without an actual scientific way to measure that, I can't be sure. So I'm only giving you a sense of it. I'm not giving you a scientific opinion. It felt way safer than just staying home. And that's a big credit to the system that has adjusted that much to make that possible. So the traveling, I would say traveling with a mask is hard, especially if you have to try to sleep on the plane because it's a long flight. We had a 4-hour delay followed by a 7-hour flight on the way there. If you add in the travel time and the taxi time and everything else, 12 hours in a mask, it's a long day. But a lot of people who have just regular jobs are doing that every day. So not going to complain about it. So it was all good. So here's a question that people keep asking me. I have apparently spoken differently about how we should look at business close downs, the lockdowns, versus wearing masks. And it's actually a fair question. In one case, I say that the business closures, the forced closures, do not have scientific backing to suggest that they work. Would you agree with that? That we don't really have scientific backing to suggest that closing businesses, as opposed to keeping them open with all the right restrictions, we don't have evidence which one of those makes a difference. Now, I just told you I did a very complicated, extensive, travel, and I did feel safer. I don't know, but it felt safer than normal life because it was so, designed to be controlled, where normal life is messy, right? But if it's designed to be controlled, maybe they can do it better than your normal messy life, right? That's what I think. So, I don't have a feeling of whether we can tell that closing businesses helps or hurts. So we don't have science, because it's hard to measure and it's kind of too early to even know if you did. So what do? You don't have science, but common sense kind of can point in both directions, can it? You could make a case that social distancing would be better served with business closures, but then how do you factor in the fact that it wouldn't be normal business? It would be opened under certain careful restrictions. Would that make it safer than normal life? It might. Who knows? So I would say business closures are unproven scientifically, and so there you should really pause to see if you want to do that, because we know the cost of it could be gigantic in terms of extra poverty and all the things that causes. But I say the opposite, or something very different about masks. And people have pointed out that looks like an inconsistency. Why is it that I say I can't make a determination about whether closing businesses makes sense, but my common sense of it, which is largely an illusion, common sense is an illusion, but my feeling of it, having observed it up close, my feeling of it is it's a mistake to close businesses. There might be some exceptions, like possibly a gym, but no, even a gym, they would do good procedures. So I would say anybody who is willing to open up and do careful procedures, my logical, just experienced brain that sees the world says probably opening businesses would be a better, way forward. And California is starting to open up a little bit starting this week, so that's good. But I don't say that with masks. Now, masks also have this problem that we don't know exactly what masks are doing in the context of the coronavirus. We know they've been measured in different contexts for different purposes in the past. We know that the experts overwhelmingly say you should use masks. We know that other people point to other studies and say, no, these studies show masks don't make a difference. So why is it that I would have a different opinion about masks in which I say you should go ahead and wear them, take the recommendation of the experts, whereas the business opening stuff I'm a little squishier on, and it looks like maybe we should just open the businesses and not do that. Why do I make that difference? And the difference is this. Here at first, some context. You live in a life and a world in which you don't have scientific studies for almost anything you do. You don't know that waking up a little early will make your life better or worse. You don't know that this meal you ate is the smart one or not the smart one. You don't know if, you don't know much about anything. You don't know the house you might buy, the job you might take, the commute you choose. Almost everything you're doing all day long is stuff that nobody's studied. You've just lived in the world long enough where you say, I think this looks like a better choice than this, but there's no way to know. You just got to take your shot. Masks are a little like that. And there's a rule that I use that I apply to just about everything, which is that friction pretty much always works. Now, I'll leave a little wiggle room because I'm sure there's some case where it doesn't. But if you've lived long enough, you see that wherever friction is applied, or wherever it's removed, it has exactly the predictable impact. If you tax something, people will do less of it. If you build a wall, it'll be harder for people to get over. It won't stop it, but it'll be harder, might reduce it. If you restrict anything, you get less of it. And with my living in the world, without the science, just living in the world, I say, hey, if the problem is stuff shooting out of your mouth, and we know that that's a far bigger problem than what you're touching, that seems to be the common understanding. If it's stuff that's shooting out of your mouth and you can put some friction on that thing, does it stop every bit of the virus? No, we know it doesn't stop all of the virus. But we do know that the amount of the viral load makes a big difference in what the outcomes are. So as long as we know that the degree of viral load makes a big difference, and common sense and living in the world says, well, this mask probably limits some of that. Does it stop all of it? No, nobody thinks that. Nobody thinks a mask stops a virus. Nobody thinks that. There's no expert who thinks that. They think it might slow it down, might add a little friction. Now, do you need to do a scientific study in every situation in your life in which somebody is applying or taking away friction to know what kind of effect that will have? You would be right 99% of the time if you just said that friction is a real thing and wherever it is added, you get less of a thing. Wherever it's subtracted, you get more of a thing. That's it. Now, could I be completely wrong? Could we learn someday in the future that masking was more bad than good? Absolutely. You could totally learn that. So if you think I'm telling you, I know with my great brain certainty 100% that masks are definitely the reason, I don't think that's knowable. And anybody who has that opinion, I would respect that. But I do think that if you're doing a risk management assessment, given how high the stakes are, I would say it's a good risk, and that the consensus of experts is still solidly pro-mask. If you see a growing number of experts who tell you masks don't work, I would take that seriously. But right now I don't see that. I see people who are not experts looking at studies they don't understand, which are usually on slightly different things. Whether it works in let's say a surgery setting, etc., for different kinds of diseases. I would wait for a pretty big consensus of experts to say they don't work before I would even consider that they don't work. And we don't have anything like that. Now, if you've seen actual medical experts, a consensus, not a rando doctor person, but actual growing consensus of doctors saying masks don't do anything, I would take that seriously, but that doesn't exist. And you got to ask yourself why, right? Because there are people on every side of everything. You don't have enough doctors to form sort of a movement away from masks. You don't. That means something. You should take that seriously. Now, does that mean that the experts are right? No, but since it matches with my common sense, if you want to call it that, it's always an illusion, then I'm willing to take that as a reasonable risk to wear the masks. So I guess we have to talk about GameStop, and I guess I have a different opinion about this whole GameStop stuff. I'm watching it with the same level of entertainment you are. I also don't care if the billionaire hedge fund people lose some money. I don't know how that works for the people who invested with them. I feel as though they're ordinary investors who would get it into shorts no matter what happens. But that's true of the stock market in general. So I watch it with amusement, but here's what I'm not seeing that other people are seeing. That it's some kind of it's marking some kind of a shift, or it's telling us something about the larger society, or the little people versus the rich. I don't see any of that. I just see sort of a one-off thing that somebody discovered they could do. It grew in popularity. Of course, part of that is the political climate and our history of the rich people getting richer, etc. But to me, it doesn't feel like the beginning of some kind of giant shift in culture or change or anything. It just feels like a thing that happened. I don't see it having a large carryover. Now, as I saw in the comments, apparently a lot of Chinese youth are getting into this as well. I would imagine that this will result in some kind of rule change, because otherwise these large group of organized investors will destroy the market for gain. Because you could pretty much target any company and manipulate it in this way, and apparently it's legal. Hedge funds are not that different. But I guess this only works as a legal process if not too many people do it. So that might be the long-term change, is that if the hedge funds have been doing it, and now other people can organize to do it, there's too much of it. And if there's too much of it, then maybe it has to be regulated away if there's some way to do that. I don't know if it's even practical. But so they might break this opportunity for the hedge funds, maybe, or probably not. So my best guess about where this all comes out is it just becomes a news story that fades away. Maybe there's a rule change that stops it later. But I see it more as a prank than anything else. And of course there's sub stories about. I guess the SEC said it's going to review how some of the brokerage firms acted when they stopped trading, which disadvantaged the little investor. So that has to be looked into. But it looks like the legal system or the government regulation system will look into it. So I don't know that there's as much there as other people are thinking. This feels like the kind of story that's a story because Trump is no longer in office. Something is going to fill the news cycle no matter what. You take out Trump and there's this giant empty spot that has to be filled. I don't know. This story isn't interesting to me, but it's capturing the imagination.